I always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially the woman I married. 14 years of sharing a bed, raising dogs, navigating bills and birthdays, you start to assume you know someone. But the truth is, routine can become a mask. And if you're not careful, love becomes blind, and then deaf. Deaf to the red flags that were there all along. My name is Aaron Caldwell. I'm 43 years old, work in logistics, and until recently thought I had a stable, ordinary life. Married for over a decade to a woman I thought I knew better than anyone. Turns out, I didn't know her at all. Her name's Clara. We met in 2009 at a community fundraiser I was managing for local veterans. She volunteered to help with decorations. Bright eyes, constant laughter, a presence that lit up a room. I was a logistics coordinator for a freight company, practical to a fault, while she taught yoga part-time and sold handmade candles on Etsy. We seemed like opposites, but it worked. For a long time, it worked. The first 10 years of our marriage weren't perfect, but they were solid. Vacations every couple of years, savings steadily growing, game nights with friends, the occasional fight about spending or clutter, nothing unusual. But about a year ago, Clara started changing in subtle ways. Not dramatic, not all at once, just shifts. It started with her quitting yoga, said it wasn't fulfilling her anymore. Then came the juice cleanses, the tarot cards, the energy realignment sessions with a woman named Lyra who charged $300 an hour and didn't take Venmo because technology has karmic weight. I rolled my eyes but didn't push. I figured it was a phase, the kind that ends with essential oils and a mild credit card bill. Then came the retreats, soul reclamation weekends, vibrational ascension intensives, all led by a man named Colin, no last name, who wore flowing linen robes and posted YouTube rants about the toxic masculine energy in the West. Clara called him an awakened being. I called him a grifter in designer sandals. Still, I didn't stop her. I believed people need their space, their weird little obsessions, as long as they don't hurt anyone. But by the third retreat, she wasn't coming back quite the same. Her tone toward me changed. Passive-aggressive digs about my job, about how I carried trauma in my root chakra and needed to stop identifying with linear achievement. I'm not even sure what that meant, but I smiled and said I'd look into it. One weekend, she left on Thursday instead of Friday, said the retreat had been extended. Monday came, no Clara. Tuesday I called, no answer. By Wednesday, I was halfway to panicking. Then a text came in. I've met someone who understands my path. I need time. Please don't contact me for now. No anger, no regret, just detachment. That night I came home and noticed some of her things were missing. Her clothes, sure, but also the antique mirror we bought in Charleston, a few heirlooms from my mom's side, and, most unsettling of all, our marriage file cabinet, the one that had birth certificates, joint account info, property documents. I opened my laptop. Our savings account had been drained. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just Clara leaving me. This was a coordinated exit, a strategic erasure. And it didn't take a psychic to see who was guiding her hand. Colin, the spiritual guru, wasn't just her mentor. He was her new partner. And together, they were trying to write me out of my own life. But what they didn't know, what Clara had never understood about me, was that I'm quiet, not naive. I'd been sensing this storm for months, and while she was chanting by candlelight, I was quietly fortifying everything that mattered. They thought they were writing the final chapter of my story. What they didn't know was that I had already started writing theirs.
After the initial shock wore off, I didn't scream, I didn't rage, and I didn't call anyone. I sat at the kitchen table for over an hour, just staring at the spot where her candle election used to be. The room felt unfamiliar, stripped not just of Clara's belongings, but of the illusion that this was still a home. That illusion was gone now, shattered by a 2-sentence text and a drained account. But I didn't panic. I've never been the kind of man who reacts without thinking. Logistics, the career that built me, is about control, anticipation, preparation. I'd made a living solving other people's emergencies before they ever happened. So when the cracks in my marriage started to show, I quietly started protecting myself. The first thing I did was open a second bank account 6 months earlier. I told Clara it was for a business venture I was considering, a harmless white lie. I started diverting a percentage of my income into that account, small enough that she didn't notice, but consistent enough that by the time she left, I had just over $32,000 sitting untouched. I also scanned and encrypted every critical document we owned: home title, tax returns, health records, insurance policies. Stored them on an encrypted drive hidden inside a locked toolbox in the garage, right next to the box of old power tools she never touched. The house we lived in? Bought it before we married. My name was the only one on the mortgage. Clara's name had been added to the deed years later. Romantic gesture at the time, nothing more. But I kept a notarized copy of the original title and had quietly revoked her name through a quitclaim deed a few weeks before her last retreat. She never noticed. She wasn't paying attention to legalities. She was too busy chasing alignment. I also changed my login credentials to our main joint bank account the day she left. I had a feeling she'd try to move more money if she hadn't already. The balance was zero when I got there, but I locked it anyway and froze the account. Called the bank, reported suspected fraud, and requested transaction records for the past 90 days. I told the rep my wife had left unexpectedly and may have done so under undue influence. That phrase got her attention. The paperwork would take a week, she said. I told her that was fine. I wasn't in a hurry. Not yet. Meanwhile, I reached out to an old contact of mine, Mike Corbin, a former client turned friend who now worked in private asset recovery. We'd bonded a few years earlier over a shipment that went sideways and stayed in touch ever since. Mike was the kind of guy who could find a hidden transfer faster than a forensic accountant with a subpoena. We met for lunch at a quiet Italian place outside town. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, just nodded, then pulled out a small notepad. "Send me every account number," he said, "and anything you've got on this guru guy. Kalen, right?" Kalen. The name felt sour in my mouth. Yeah, Kalen. No last name, no job, no credentials, just a robe and a god complex. Mike grinned. "I've dealt with worse. Give me 48 hours. I went home and changed all the passwords on my cloud drives, my insurance accounts, even the alarm system. If Clara came back for round 2, she'd find a very different battlefield. I wasn't mourning anymore. I was preparing. This wasn't about winning her back or proving a point. This was about protecting everything I'd built and making sure that if Clara and her so-called soulmate thought they could erase me, they'd soon realize I was still very much in the picture, just not in the way they expected.
2 days later, Mike called me. "Got something," he said. "You're going to want to sit down." I didn't sit down. I just braced myself. According to Mike, Clara had been planning her exit longer than I thought. The joint account hadn't been hit all at once. It had been drained gradually over the course of 4 months. Small transfers, $800 here, $1,200 there, just under the radar of daily notices. Every deposit I made, she pulled a piece of it away. Most of it went to a new account in her name only, but some had been sent directly to a holding account under Kalen's name. Kalen had a last name, it turned out, Kalen Booker. He'd been sued twice in the past, once for spiritual abuse and another time for defrauding a client during a real estate deal in Sedona, Arizona. Both cases were quietly settled. They were whispers online, posts from former followers, testimonials from people who claimed he manipulated them into giving up assets, relationships, even custody of children. And here he was, back at it again, selling soul contracts and offering ascension packages for $9,999. He even had a PayPal link. Mike sent me screenshots of Kalen's financial trail. There were wire transfers from Clara, PayPal donations, even a GoFundMe she'd created titled "Support My Spiritual Journey." She had raised over $4,000 from friends and yoga clients, many of whom probably had no idea they were funding a man with a history of manipulation.
What really hit me, though, was seeing that she had listed her marital status as divorced on one of her new accounts. Divorced. Like I'd vanished. Like I didn't even exist anymore. It was surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart while knowing it was yours. I walked through our house, now stripped of her energy, her music, her scattered incense trays and half-finished crystals. I opened the drawer where she used to keep our bills and found something I hadn't seen before, a thick manila envelope buried under papers. Inside were printed contracts, ones I'd never signed. There was a refinance application for our house, listing Kaylin Booker as a co-borrower. A medical release form with my name on it, authorizing access to my health insurance. And most disturbing of all, a durable power of attorney form with my signature forged at the bottom. That stopped me cold. This wasn't just betrayal. This wasn't just selfishness. This was calculated theft, and she'd gone so far as to practice my signature on the back of a credit card statement. The page had faint outlines of repeated versions of my name, some close, some sloppy. Like a student rehearsing a test. I sat down with those papers, laid them out on the table, and took photos of every page. I encrypted and uploaded them to a cloud folder. Then I emailed a copy to Mike and another to myself using a hidden secure address I'd created back when I managed freight logistics for a government contract. Old habits die hard. That night, I logged into one of Clara's old email accounts. She'd left it open on the shared desktop months ago and never cleared the auto login. Most of the emails were junk: yoga retreats, crystal shops, holistic seminars. But one thread stood out. Subject line: Plan forward. Full transition. It was from Kaylin. Long and flowery, full of talk about cleansing her ties to material anchors and untethering from karmic dependencies. It ended with something much less poetic. Make sure he doesn't contest anything. If he tries, I have someone who can help facilitate compliance. That was the moment I stopped calling him a clown. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just spiritual delusion. This was organized, structured, and Clara wasn't just a victim, she was complicit. I looked at the message again, then closed the browser and turned off the lights. The storm had a name now, and I wasn't planning to ride it out. I was going to redirect it.
The next morning, I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen counter with a yellow legal pad. Just me, a pen, and everything I had to lose, or reclaim. This wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about execution. And when it came to strategy, I had one advantage Clara and Kaylin didn't: patience. Step one was legal. I contacted a law firm in town that specialized in fraud and asset protection, not the ones that advertise on billboards, the quiet kind. My appointment was with a man named Dennis Lathrop, 60, gray suit, no nonsense. He reviewed the forged documents, flipped through the photos, and looked up at me with a calm nod. "This is bad," he said, "but not for you." He explained that because I never signed the refinance papers, and because the quitclaim deed removing Clara's name was filed legally beforehand, any attempt to use our house as collateral without my consent was null and criminal. The power of attorney form? Fraudulent. No legal standing. The insurance release? Same. She was building a false legal identity for someone she was still married to. Dennis leaned back in his chair. "Do you want to press charges?" "Not yet," I said. "I want her to walk into the trap herself." He raised an eyebrow. I explained. I needed her to believe I was still confused, that I was still lost, that I hadn't figured it out. I wanted her,
and Kaylin to keep moving forward with their plan, because the deeper they went, the more tangled they'd get. And when the moment came, I wouldn't have to force anything. They would hang themselves on their own rope. Step 2 was financial. I worked with Mike to flag all suspicious transfers and accounts. He contacted an old friend of his, a compliance officer at Clara's bank, who discreetly tagged any movement over $500 tied to her accounts. That's how we discovered she was wiring money to a trust in Nevada under Kaylin's name, a shell structure designed to disappear funds before a divorce filing. So I moved first. I filed a motion with the county clerk placing a temporary freeze on all jointly owned assets, citing evidence of financial misconduct and forged documentation. That included our house, vehicles, and any accounts bearing both our names. Dennis filed a concurrent injunction requesting financial discovery, which would allow us to subpoena Clara's and Kaylin's transaction history once court proceedings began. Step 3 was documentation. I began building a digital file, dates, screenshots, scanned forms, emails, forged signatures, voice memos from my own observations, even timestamps from security footage showing when Clara entered my home after she'd left. Every move she made after her Ascension weekend was logged, calmly, quietly. Just facts. I also reached out to Lyra, her old energy guide, the one who'd introduced Clara to Kaylin. I didn't expect much, but I was surprised. When I called, she sounded exhausted. I told her I was Clara's husband and that I needed to understand what Kaylin's real game was. There was a pause. Then she said softly, "You're not the first." According to Lyra, Kaylin had been involved with at least 3 other women in spiritual transitions, all of whom suddenly cut ties with spouses, liquidated assets, and disappeared. One woman tried to sue, but the case was buried in mediation. Another ended up hospitalized after a guided ceremony that went wrong. Kaylin vanished each time, re-emerged months later under a slightly different name. Lyra gave me her blessing to share her story if needed, said she was tired of enabling the charade. She also told me where Kaylin had been staying, a remote cabin north of town, technically owned by one of his disciples, but legally still in her father's name. That gave me another idea. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to show up at the cabin and shout. That's not who I am. But I was going to turn the lights on the room they thought they owned. Time to make them visible.
The following week, everything was set. The paperwork had been filed. The accounts were monitored. The story was still unfolding, but I already had the ending in motion. Clara didn't know any of it yet. She still thought I was licking my wounds in silence. She even sent a text, "We need to talk soon. I'd like this to stay peaceful." I didn't respond. Peace is exactly what I was giving her, but not the kind she expected. Mike and I paid a visit to the property where Kaylin had been staying. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't need to. The point wasn't confrontation, it was awareness. Mike handled it. He knocked on the door and introduced himself as an asset investigator with questions about financial transfers tied to an ongoing legal matter. Polite, professional, enough to rattle the cage. Kaylin answered barefoot, wearing what looked like repurposed curtains. Mike told me later the guy didn't say much, just stood there blinking, wide-eyed, like a possum caught in daylight. 2 days after that, Clara called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "Aaron, I've been told someone came by the property. That's not okay. I thought we agreed to stay respectful during this process. Please, let's just file things cleanly and move on." Still, I said nothing. That same afternoon, I received an alert from Mike. A large transfer had just been reversed by the bank, one of the flagged transactions from Clara to Kaylin's shell trust. The bank's fraud department had officially opened a case. The money, $22,000, was frozen. She was going to feel that. But the moment that truly set everything in motion came 2 days later. I received a knock at the door, a courier service, legal envelope. Clara's attorney had filed for divorce. Inside the envelope were requests for property division, alimony, and access to my health insurance. They were requesting that I sign over half of our retirement accounts, one of the vehicles, the newer one, of course, and pay monthly spousal support for an indefinite term. There was even a request for immediate financial disbursement, citing undue emotional burden. It was Kalen's hand behind it, no doubt. I could practically hear his smug voice between the lines. What Clara didn't know was that Dennis and I had already filed a countersuit, one that cited fraud, financial coercion, forged legal documents, and malicious asset concealment. The moment she filed, our response was activated. Within hours, her attorney received our entire file. And I do mean the entire file. Scanned copies of the forged refinance application, the fake power of attorney, her text threads referencing moving on before he realizes, bank records showing direct transfers to Kalen's shell trust, a notarized affidavit from Lyra describing how Kalen manipulated multiple women in nearly identical situations, including Clara. We'd also submitted a formal complaint to the State Bar Association and attached a copy of the letter Kalen had sent Clara advising her to untether me. That alone would call into question every legal decision Clara's camp had made. That night, I received a call from her attorney directly. "Mr. Merrick," he said, voice stiff, "we received your documents. There seems to be substantial conflict here. I believe this situation may be better suited for mediation." You can say that again, I thought. By the end of the week, a judge had issued an emergency injunction preventing Clara or any associated party from accessing or selling any joint property. All of her accounts were being reviewed. Her financial healer, Kalen, was named in the documents as a non-party of interest due to his involvement in the suspicious transactions. She hadn't seen it coming. And that was the point. All that silence, all that space she thought I'd given her to move forward, had just been rope. And now she was wrapped in it. The unraveling started slow, like a rope fraying strand by strand. But once it began, there was no stopping it. 3 days after the injunction was filed, Clara showed up at my front door. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind that comes from a life starting to slip through your fingers. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, clothes that didn't match her usual carefully curated look. She wasn't glowing with cosmic purpose anymore. She looked lost. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Can we talk?" she asked, arms crossed, like she was trying to hold herself together. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. She paused, waiting for me to offer something. I didn't. "You blindsided me, Aaron," she said finally. "That was low." "Low? You could have just told me you were angry. Instead, you sent attorneys and subpoenas, froze my accounts." I nodded once. "Calm. Let her talk." "I've been trying to move forward peacefully. You're making this difficult." I looked her in the eye. "Clara, you forged my signature. You tried to refinance our house and cut me out. You moved our money behind my back. You followed the advice of a man who's been investigated in 3 states. You don't get to define what peaceful looks like." She didn't answer, just stood there, mouth slightly open. "What do you want?" I asked. I want to work this out. Without lawyers, we can divide things fairly, just between us." "No." "Aaron, it's already in motion. It's not personal anymore. It's legal now." She stepped forward, voice dropping. "Colleen says you're using masculine control patterns, that you're trying to punish me for choosing a new path." That made me laugh. Not loud, just a small exhale of disbelief. "Tell Colleen I said hello, and that he should check his email." She flinched at that. She didn't know yet, but she would soon. Mike had dug deeper, not just into the financials, but into Colleen's past. It turned out the guru had used at least 3 aliases across multiple states. He had an open warrant in New Mexico for unpaid fines related to unlicensed spiritual therapy. But more than that, he'd been involved in a shady land deal with another former disciple, a woman who signed over her property after weeks of spiritual guidance. She later sued and won a quiet settlement. Mike passed it all to Dennis. Dennis sent it to Clara's lawyer. Her case, already shaky, now had a radioactive partner tied to fraud, coercion, and financial manipulation. The kind of thing a judge doesn't just frown at, the kind that burns entire cases to the ground. After Clara left my porch that day, I never heard from her directly again. Everything went through lawyers. The tone of her legal team changed dramatically. Requests for alimony vanished. The emotional distress claims were withdrawn. And soon after, her attorney proposed a new settlement, one that looked very different from the first. She offered to forfeit her claim to the house. She agreed to walk away from the retirement accounts, the vehicles, even the savings, what was left of it. The only thing she wanted now was for both parties to mutually agree not to pursue further action. I had already won, but I hadn't gloating. There was no need to drag it out. I accepted the proposal with one condition. Clara would sign a sworn statement acknowledging the forged documents and confirming that Colleen Booker advised her to act in those ways. She signed. And just like that, the storm began to fade. Colleen disappeared from social media days later. His website went offline. His donation links dead. I assume he packed his robe and moved to the next town, the next woman, the next opportunity. But this time, he left with a dent in his game and a legal record that would follow him. And Clara? She went quiet. The same woman who once claimed to be transcending this plane had finally come back down to earth. 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized, I got a call from Dennis. He sounded almost amused. "You're gonna want to see the news this morning," he said. I opened my laptop, not expecting much. Maybe a local report or an update about Colin's past cases. What I found was more than I'd hoped for. A regional news site had picked up a story titled "Spiritual Advisor Under Investigation for Multi-State Fraud Scheme." Colin's name, full name, was listed. So were details from at least 2 other women who had come forward, claiming they'd been manipulated into signing over property, cash, or legal rights under the guise of spiritual surrender. One of the women had included screenshots of emails, nearly identical to the ones I'd found in Clara's inbox, word-for-word mantras like "release all material bondage and trust the cosmic flow." It wasn't spiritual. It was scripted. According to the article, state investigators were reopening Colin's previous cases, now with a new pattern emerging, one that suggested a targeted system: isolate, exploit, vanish. He wasn't just a fraud. He was a repeat predator, cloaked in sage smoke and vague philosophies. Lyra had spoken to the reporter anonymously. She described herself as an enabler turned whistleblower. Brave woman. I hoped she found peace in breaking that silence. I forwarded the article to Clara's attorney. No response. I imagine there wasn't much left to say. A week later, I received a formal letter from the county registrar's office. The forged documents, including the refinance and power of attorney, had been flagged, voided, and attached to a case number for potential criminal review. I wouldn't be pressing charges personally, but the paper trail now had its own momentum. The house was mine, my accounts restored,
my name, untangled from hers. But justice, real justice, doesn't always come from courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it comes from smaller places. One evening I went to the grocery store, same one Clara and I used to visit together. I ran into Molly, a friend of hers from her old yoga studio. She looked surprised to see me, then cautiously smiled. "Hey, I heard everything," she said. "You doing okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, actually I am." She hesitated, then leaned in. "You know, Clara has kind of disappeared. She left the studio, moved out of her temporary place. A couple of us think she went to Oregon. Nobody's really heard from her." I thanked her for telling me. Not out of curiosity, I didn't care where Clara went, but it confirmed what I already suspected. She was running. Not from me, from everything. She burned her bridges in silence, just like she left. No goodbye to her friends, no explanation. The spiritual path she was so proud of had collapsed the moment the spotlight turned on. And Colin? His Healing Collective website was gone. But the FBI had been forwarded the financial reports we gathered. Mike's contact confirmed they were interested, especially because one of Colin's accounts had received flagged interstate wire transfers that violated multiple banking regulations. He'd be watched now. He might pop up again, but the playbook was exposed. He wouldn't move as freely. And the women he hadn't reached yet, maybe they'd be safer now. And as for me, I wasn't celebrating. I didn't throw a party or post a cryptic quote about karma online. I just walked into my house, made a strong cup of coffee, and sat on my back porch. Peace. Actual peace. Not the performative kind Clara always posted about. I'd been erased once, in paperwork, in intention, in someone else's story. But I'd written myself back in. Not with rage, with facts, with timing, with quiet, relentless clarity. And that, in the end, was the kind of justice no one saw coming.
A year has passed since Clara walked out of our life and into whatever illusion she thought Kaylin represented. A year since the text stopped, the lawyers stopped, the damage stopped trying to grow. And in that quiet space that followed, I found something I didn't expect. Myself. Not the version of me that spent years managing spreadsheets, budgets, and grocery lists. Not the husband who swallowed doubts to keep peace at the dinner table. Not even the man who calmly prepared for betrayal while pretending everything was fine. I found the man underneath all that. The one who could sit still and not need to fix everything. I sold the house 6 months ago. Not because I had to. I could have stayed. I won that right. But every room had echoes I didn't want to carry. The scent of old incense still clung to the walls no matter how many times I repainted. So I let it go, on my terms. I moved to a smaller town just outside Asheville. Found a modest cabin surrounded by pine and fog. 2 bedrooms, a wood-burning stove, neighbors far enough away I don't see them unless I want to. It's quiet here. In the mornings, I drink my coffee without looking at a screen. I read old novels. I take long walks. Some days I even forget what day it is. And that, to me, feels like a kind of healing. I started freelancing again, consulting for supply chains, part-time. Nothing major, just enough to stay sharp and pay the bills. But I also picked up something new. Woodworking. There's something honest about shaping things with your hands, about building something from nothing, piece by piece, and knowing you are the reason it exists. No signatures can be forged on it. No illusions can claim it. It's real, solid, mine. Sometimes I wonder what happened to Clara. If she really went to Oregon, if she stayed with Kaylin after everything unraveled, or if she moved on to another path, another belief, another version of herself. I don't wonder in a bitter way, just curiously, like passing an old photo in a forgotten drawer. I don't hate her anymore. That was a season, and it passed. What she did was calculated, yes, hurtful. But what she gave me in the process was something she never intended, a return to myself. The man I was before all this, he lived for order, predictability, comfort. The man I am now, he lives for truth. Even when it's ugly, even when it costs something. A few months ago, I got a letter. Handwritten, no return address. It was from one of Kaylin's former victims, a woman in Flagstaff who read about the investigation and tracked down my name through legal records. She said I had inspired her to come forward, that my case gave hers context, that she finally stopped blaming herself for falling into his trap. She ended the note with a single line. Your quiet fight helped me find my voice. I pinned that letter above my workbench. On hard days, I look at it and remember, sometimes revenge doesn't roar. It doesn't scream or explode or leave someone sobbing in the rain. Sometimes it's just a man rebuilding something slowly, thoughtfully, without noise or permission. Sometimes revenge is peace. Not the fake kind you post about to prove you've moved on. The real kind. The kind that comes when you know the storm came, tried to bury you, and failed. I live alone now, but I don't feel lonely. Not anymore. Because what I have now is mine. No guru can take it, no partner can erase it, and no betrayal can rewrite it.